fraud ring going on in Minnesota to the tune of $250 million, people buying resorts in Kenya. Like, how did this happen?
Well, that's the question of the day. And I think that's why we had a press conference today, and I asked for a special investigation to be conducted. Bottom line is Minnesotans deserve to know several answers. And one of them would be, what did Governor Walz know? And when did he learn it? And when did he make a decision to try to use a district court judge as a scapegoat for his and the Department of Education's actions? And finally, I think we need to ask the question, who's Tim Walz trying to protect? Is this all about his political race? Is it about his commissioner of the Department of Education? Who's he trying to protect? And I think Minnesotans are frustrated. It was almost unprecedented for the judicial branch to issue a statement on behalf of Judge Guthman on Friday, basically saying that the governor of Minnesota had lied. And so then Walz comes out with a statement saying, well, we were told that this and that. And he talked even about jail time. And so there was a fact checker on one of the major networks today, came out and fact checked Tim Walz and said that was totally false. There was never any question about someone being put in jail. But I think this is a kind of casual fabrication that we've come to see from Tim Walz when he sort of caught red-handed. And that's what happened here. Is this time he got caught in a red-handed lie, and it was by a judge. And Tim Walz had the audacity to say that he wanted an investigation of the judge. And so I think Minnesota deserves to know what in the world is going on. We have $250 million defrauded from the state of Minnesota, possibly more. Andy Luger from the U.S. Attorney's Office is saying this is the floor. It may well be more than that. This is a huge issue, and this is the largest fraud case in the entire country in regards to a COVID relief program.
Well, one of the things you're being so kind, I would say not to mention, is the fact that a lot of this money was also given to Democrat politicians. I mean, Keith Ellison and Mayor Frey, and they say they've sent it back. Who knows? But you want to speak to that as well?
Well, you're right, Chris. We do know that of the indicted for this fraud, they definitely had been donating to Ilhan Omar and Keith Ellison and I think Senator Fatah. So it does entertain the question, was this a pay-to-play kind of a program? And I think that's partly what we need to ask an investigator to look into. Was there a quid pro quo here? Just what in the world happened? But I think for Tim Walz to come out and tell us late last week that he was speechless and he wanted the judge investigated, and the judge told him that they had to make these fraudulent payments. And then they came out and said the FBI told them that they had to continue making these fraudulent payments of hundreds of millions of dollars because the FBI was now involved and they didn't want Tim Walz or the Department of Education messing up their investigation. So I told the press today in our press conference, I defy you to show me the paperwork whereby the FBI told the governor of Minnesota to keep making fraudulent payments to the tune of tens of millions of dollars so that the FBI could continue in an unfettered fashion its investigation. I'm not buying. I think that's another fabrication, just like Tim Walz talking about they're being threatened with jail time. That did not happen. The media's already fact-checked that and said that was a lie.
If you're just joining us, Dr. Scott Jensen, running for governor for the great state of Minnesota on the GOP ticket. We're talking about a giant fraud case that the U.S. attorney in Minnesota is getting to the bottom of with indictments and big numbers, and it's just absolutely incredible what is taking place. So many people haven't been following the TikTok of this, if you will, Dr. Jensen, obviously like you have. And you mentioned before, Chris, you got to ask yourself, okay, so who is Governor Walz protecting? What do you mean by that specifically, and can you speak more to that?
Well, did he decide to tell the world that the judge was the one?
Doctor,
continue fraudulent payments even after they knew, even after the Department of Education knew the problem. So I think that was a huge issue. When the governor of Minnesota says it's the judge's fault, I think one of the questions that leads us to ask, who's he trying to protect? Is it himself, or is it his staff? Is it Heather Mueller?
so, sorry, Dr. Jensen, I don't know if you can hear us, but you're kind of cutting in and out. But you said that you're looking for a special investigation to take place. We're, 5 weeks out from the election. What are the chances of you getting any sort of real teeth in a special investigation done before this election?
Well, I think if the outcry from Minnesotans is strong enough, I think it's a very good chance. I mean, I think the best thing Tim Walz could do would be to call for an investigation.
Yes.
He should do it himself. He should say, listen, I want the truth to be told. And he should just confess. If he made statements that weren't true, then he should say, listen, I want the record cleared because I don't want to be inappropriately or falsely accusing a judge. No governor should ever want that to be in limbo. So I think Tim Walz would be the ideal person to say, hey, let's have a special investigation. Jim Nobles is a person who's worked with the legislators, auditors group for years, well respected on both sides of the aisle as a nonpartisan, good, judicious auditor. This would be, I think, the best way to go. But I think Minnesota needs to cry with one voice. We're not okay with this. We already have seen Tim Walz shut down the transparency of the campaign by refusing debates. And now he wants to tell us that the FBI is to blame or the judge is to blame, but certainly it's not Tim Walz. This is a monstrously large fraud case. This is $250 million. This is more than the entire Vikings team gets paid in a year, all stolen. And Tim Walz should want a transparent, honest accounting of what happened.
If you're just joining us, Dr. Scott Jensen's with us. If you want to call in and ask questions, number to do so, 701-271-1100. Again, 701-271-1100. You mentioned, Dr. Jensen, $250 million. This was a federal money from COVID-19 relief funds. So obviously everybody that's listening, this is their money. I think I've heard the number 50 million recovered. Where's the other 200 million? Is there any chance of recovering that?
I think there's a chance that we'll recover some of it, but getting the majority of it, I think, would be a long shot. I think what people need to realize also, Chris, is that this was just sheer, unadulterated, bold fraud. I mean, in Wilmer, one place had been reporting that they'd been feeding 2,000 kids, and only 30 or 35 of those kids were actually real people. They were using programs on internet to generate fictitious names so they could put those on their rosters as kids that they were feeding. Over 100 million meals were never served that were paid for by the Department of Education. And like I say, in Wilmer, 2,000 meals going out presumably in a routine fashion, and yet only 35 of these were actually real people.
Unbelievable. I've got text coming in too, Dr. Jensen. Can you stick around for just a couple minutes on the next segment, Dr. Jensen? Because I want to ask you also about CNN, of all places, put out a piece calling Minneapolis, or referring to it again as Murderapolis, and some of the things that are going on there with crime and killings. Are you able to stick around for a few more minutes, Doc?
I sure am.
All right, so we've got 60 seconds here because I've got also a text coming in, Doc. When we come back to this person says, hey, don't forget about the child care scam as well. And I had forgotten about it. So maybe you can refresh our memory on that and tell us more about what's going on there, and 250 million there. I mean, it all starts